Grove Cemetery. I am Carl Bolinas, the president of the Friends of Maple Grove Cemetery. How many people have never been here before? Oh, okay. Thank you so much for coming. We are one of the most unique cemeteries, I think, in the United States. When I told Borough President Donovan, I said, we want Maple Grove to be what Greenwood is to Brooklyn. Maple Grove be to Queens. We are 148 years old. Founded in 1875. The only cemetery with a center like this building, all right? The only one with a concert hall. This is our concert hall. And it's called the Celebration Hall because it was, because the president who built it said, I want to celebrate life here. All right, with me is Helen Day, who is the vice president and on our advisory board, and Shahriar Hussain, who's also one of our advisory directors or board members, who's also with the Queens Chamber of Commerce. And in the back we have Shiloh
Busico.
See? Who is also on our board and will be taping. So thank you again for coming. Helen will talk about some of the unique programs that we have here at Maple Grove.
Okay, and before we forget, just a couple of housekeeping items. We will have a reception downstairs afterwards, and the restrooms are downstairs as you go down the stairs on the left, or you can take the elevators to avoid the stairs. We also would like you to turn off your cell phones so we don't have interruption. I got mine off. Yes, I do. And the cemetery gates will be open here for leaving. None of the other gates to the cemetery will be open. You do have to go out this way. We may close the gates.
Yes.
So
officially we will be locked.
Yeah, to prevent visitors from coming in who are not coming to this presentation. And then afterwards we'll open them. But if anyone needs to leave, just let us know and we'll gladly go out and swing the gates open for you.
Yeah, basically you're locked in the cemetery, but we have the keys.
Yeah.
Not too much.
Multiple copies, so we can't lose them.
Yeah.
So we're very happy to celebrate this book launch tonight. But this is one of many events that we hold here at Maple Grove. Usually, except for maybe the end of July, beginning of August, we have many, many events each month. We have concerts here, we have workshops, we have book presentations, anything you can imagine. And each event that we have is dedicated to someone who is buried here at the cemetery. We have 117,000 people behind us, and we want to tell their stories. So we're constantly doing research. We're constantly finding out, well, who were they? What did they do? And we find some extraordinary stories. People from every walk of life. We do have a number of events coming up.
Dedication.
Oh,
Alita.
yes. Oh, for, what was the last?
Alita Seals. This event is dedicated to Alita Seals, a librarian who just passed away and wrote a wonderful book on Juneteenth. And she's buried here. So this event is dedicated in her honor.
So we hope that you will come back to Maple Grove and enjoy some of our other events through the season. We'll have piano concerts, we'll have changing art exhibits. These walls can hold artworks, and we switch them out for different individuals and groups. We have a display downstairs right now that are the birds of northern Tanzania. A photographer from Forest Hills got to go on his dream trip to northern Tanzania and print these beautiful photographs so you can enjoy them. They've been up for the summer. We'll be switching over in September though, so we'll have something new for you to see. We do have some other presentations, and on September 23rd we'll have a Las Vegas tribute. But you can see our calendar online, and we also have some copies downstairs for you.
Please sign the form downstairs for with your email so you can send you updates about what's going on. And we hope to bring back our Murder Mystery Dinner Theater, which happens right here. COVID killed it for a while, but we write the script ourselves and we base it on historical people buried at Maple Grove. I told you, we're very unique.
That'll be the beginning of November.
Okay.
All
right.
Thank you so much. So without further ado, here is Ina.
Ina from the Q and Willow, who's co-sponsoring this event.
Thank you for joining us. My name is Vina Castillo, co-owner of Q and Willow Books. We're right on Lefferts Boulevard, so please visit if you can. So we're very excited and to celebrate the release of Jennifer Baker's debut YA novel, Forgive Me Not, in partnership with the Friends of Maple Grove. Jennifer will be in conversation with New York Times bestselling authors Brendan Kiely and Renee Watson. Here they come.
Things before I forget is there are empanadas at the reception after. There are cookies outside if you missed them. And I will be giving away copies of Brendan. Sorry, that was weird. Brendan's book and Renee's book. And my imprint brother, Don, are you here? We'll be giving away copies of Don's book. That they're young people, so the young people get first dibs. And so we're going to be talking mostly. I might read a little bit. There, as you might have seen, postcards on either end with pens and whatnot and stamps, because I have a little writing suggestion for folks, and then you can mail them to yourself or somebody else if you like. And I'm going to read a little bit of the letter because those are very pertinent to the book. And so that's where that came from. But mostly we're just going to converse, and then we're going to hang out, and then they're going to kick us out before the kids leave, as they should. But I want to thank Renee and Brendan for being here and for blurbing this book and being so kind in general and being wonderful friends. I was very, very strategic in terms of who I sent this book to first, because I was like, they will tell me if I did something wrong. I won't give Penguin back their money. We'll just recalibrate. And so also because y'all are teachers or have taught. And also Randy Rebay has been a teacher as well. And he was very kind to read this book and blurb it. And so it meant a lot to me that you two saw what I was trying to do with the book and that you were so enthusiastic and willing to put your names on it and that you've been supportive. So it means a lot that you're here with me today.
We love you.
We love you. We're so proud. So proud.
Sure, let's dig in.
Can we start with what inspired the story and just, for folks who are not familiar, what is it about? This is kind of the basic plot.
So essentially, it's a dual perspective. You hear from Violetta, who's on the cover, and her older brother Vince. And unfortunately, Violetta got into a drunk driving accident, and that ultimately caused the death of her younger sister. And in this kind of world, which is based on ours but a bit speculative, is that the victim decides what happens to juvenile offenders. So when it's determined, like, you did the crime, the victims do that. May say, oh, well, we think this person should be incarcerated for a short amount of time. We forgive them and set them free. Or they might have to do a form of rehabilitation or restorative justice that really isn't restorative justice, called the trials. And because the victims are her family, they make that decision along with the Department of Corrections. And so you get Vincent's perspective to see how this is all coming into play, and then you're with Violetta for most of the book. And for a few of the interviews that are coming out that you may hear me say, I don't know if everyone remembers this show called Forgive and Forget. Okay, you're my people.
For those who didn't, what is it?
Forgive and Forget is a syndicated show that was hosted by this woman called Mother Love. And what do you do when you do something wrong? You know what you should do? You should go on national television in front of a live audience and tell them exactly what you did, and then ask that person to come on that show with you and forgive you in front of said audience. And at the end, when they would, say everything, it was kind of Jerry Springer-esque, like even the layout. It might have been the same set, honestly. The person, Mother Love, would say, okay, go behind that door. And if that person's there, that means they're open to conversation. If not, they'll come on a video screen and tell you why they weren't coming on a plane to go. And I said, well, what if that's just how it works?
Yeah.
Well, what if that is just how the juvenile detention system works? And Violetta and Vincent were very prominent in my mind. They came to me very easily. They weren't easy to write per se, but they have always been who they were. So who they are now in that book is exactly who they were when I started this book in 2014. So that's where that came from. TV.
TV is a good thing to watch because it inspires writing. It inspires good books.
How would you introduce Violetta to people? I mean, So I love the book for many reasons, and one of the reasons that I love the book is from this dual perspective, from the idea of, at least as I was reading it, Violetta coming to terms with her actions in some regard, but also coming to terms with self, which I think is kind of a journey of like empowerment that I think is really exciting to read. And for Vincent, I was really captivated with this idea that there's someone who maybe has not yet been caught doing some things, right? And so what does justice look like? What does forgiveness mean for those who have been caught versus those who have not in some regard? And again, a sense of self-reflection. But that's a kind of broad way of talking about things. We read books for the people, I think. So how would you introduce Violetta and Vincent to folks? Who are they?
I mean, maybe I'm dating myself, but I feel like Violetta's the Jan Brady of her home, right? Like she's quite literally the middle child, and she would say, right, like Marsha, Vince. But there's a lot of love there. There's not animosity between the siblings. It's just like, she's figuring out who she is, and she's bookended by siblings who seem to really be confident in who they are. And that's a facade when you meet Vince, right? Like Vince is acting, and one of his frustrations with Violetta is that she's not better at performing. Which also, it allows him a little leniency, right? Because he's a boy, and that he's really good at sports, and that he can be charming. So what happens if you're awkward and you're a young woman of color, and maybe you're smart, but you just don't know what else there is about you, and what is society also kind of telling you at the same time. So I thought that was really important. And if I'm being honest, like, I couldn't stay in Violetta for a whole book. I don't think I could have done that. I personally like multi-perspective books. I tend to, that's why I also like the short story, because I can get in and get out. But I don't think I could have been in this book entirely with her.
Tell us why.
I think I needed relief from that space. It's a space of detention. That's a hard space to be in. I think for the sake of the story, what I wanted to pursue was the system and how everyone can be culpable within the system, including the family. And that the family is struggling because they want to help her, right? And so it's not just, in earlier iterations, it was they're pissed. Because anger is so easy to write, right? Like, flipping chairs, yelling at people, and saying, you're pissed. And then you're like, well, there has to be something different there. And my friend Erica, who I think is here, she read some of it, and she would literally point those points out, like, nope. And nope, and that's not working. And that was super helpful for me to see, like, oh, these parents really care, but I'm just making them angry. And that's not helpful. And it's not really good storytelling, as far as I'm concerned. And so it made me recognize the point. It's like, they want to help her, and the system is telling you that this is how you help your child. And you want to believe it, and you are in your most vulnerable state. And what can happen when you are in your most vulnerable state? You will listen to anyone who promises you some kind of relief. And that's what they're doing, and that's what Vince is seeing, right? right? And so Vince is kind of a golden boy, but he also is dealing with his own duality of like, this is what I present, and this is what I feel, and I can't have these things happen. And I think, especially for younger readers, I want them to realize by the end of this book, for both characters, especially for Violetta, is that you have power. You know, I think, especially, I'm 40, in my 40s, and you can be in all these environments where people are like, you don't have power. And I'm like, well, maybe I don't have the power to do this thing, but I have power over what I want to do. I have power over my body in this moment. I have power over this. Violetta, even if she is incarcerated, has power to say something that she will not do anymore, or what that she will do, or that she agrees is what may be right for her. And that was the hardest thing to get to for her. But that's what I want you to come to at the end of the story, is that you have, at every age, maybe not as an infant, but at most ages, right? Like, you have power.
There's a scene you will get to if you haven't read the book yet, and everyone's going to get the book, right? So good. So there's a scene you'll come to that is really, I find, gripping with regards to Violetta coming to her power. I'm not going to give it away, but yes, absolutely. And I really appreciate what you're talking about when you're talking about like what you want folks to get out of this book, and that understanding of recognizing one's own power, even if you're in a situation like Violetta. And what I love in that moment is how she finds courage and bravery to tell a truth about herself, but also some others around her. And it made me think a lot about what you were saying earlier about how when you're kind of given a system and a promise to some regard about how to make things work or make things easier, or you have to follow these rules, etc. You know, that even though your book imagines a different kind of justice system, I'm thinking about the justice system that we, live and actually have, and I think it really resonates in the same way, where people are told this is what's going to work, and we know for damn sure that it's not, right? And I think it's what I love about your book, and I'd love to hear you talk a bit more about, is what you wanted to sort of investigate with regards to the criminal justice system in our world, and why you used the trials. Maybe you can explain what that system is as a way to talk about your ideas about criminal justice.
Oh yeah, cool.
That was like a dissertation, but I find it so gripping. I mean, it was one of the central elements of the book that I thought was really powerful. And again, for her voice to speak against that is incredible. And you'll get to that section when you buy the book.
You did text me when you read it. You're like, I'm at the school.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm like, hooray! And you texted me at another point that I won't say, but you were like, I just finished this.
Yes. She was breaking my heart several times. She would put it back together, but then it would break again. It's a journey. It's a lot going on. But that's why it's so good. So answer that question, then I have one for you too.
So I have to say that my ideology about the criminal justice system is and was one in which you don't always question it as much as you should, right? And so Miriam Cobble was on the Stacks podcast, and she was saying that she talks to people and they're like, well, I'm very removed from criminal justice. I'm very removed from carceral. And she's like, well, do you pay taxes? And I said, yeah, that pays for prisons. And so it was like these kind of associations that we don't realize, whether they're in our neighborhood, they're in my neighborhood, they're in this neighborhood. I literally live near a criminal courthouse in Queens. So I pass it every day. And I note that in the author's note. And sometimes you're just like, what is going on? There's something happening here. This is like, and just containing people as a way to just be like, okay, the problem is solved. We don't have to worry about this anymore. And what happens when a young girl and a young girl of color is not arguing about her innocence?
Yeah.
Because that's what I found. It's not. I haven't read every book on criminal justice and especially in the children's book space. But several of the most prominent ones that are more recent are like, are they guilty? Are they
Yeah.
guilty? And then I think that's a different conversation, right? Because then you're like, well, justice is so messed up because it's putting innocent people away.
Right.
Okay, cool. Put that to the side. What happens if they did what they said they did? Now what? And that's the question. I said that changes the whole dynamic of what the story is, because we're not questioning her innocence, we're questioning her humanity. And you are questioning one's humanity in the other stories. It's not to take that away, but we're focused on the innocence and that they need to get out. And I'm like, okay, well now, especially since a lot of those tend to be focused on young boys of color, which is necessary. Again, let's talk about a young woman of color. And a brown skinned young woman of color, a biracial, part Asian, part black young woman of color, a model student, right, who makes a big mistake. And I want people to question that. And so that was more pertinent as I had to learn more about the criminal justice, and I don't know everything about the criminal justice. I know it's jacked up, but I don't know everything about it, right? And there's so many stuff like Angela Davis, and I've read her books, and Miriam Kaba, and Michelle, the new Jim Crow is like canon at this point, right? And then there's so many others coming out and more being written. But here I just said, I want you, reader, to recognize that this young girl deserves her humanity. And those around her, they're based on the situations. It's a situational thing. It is not a one, but that's what the system does. You're guilty, you go. You do this, you go. Maybe you'll get convicted if you do. But I'm like, it is not like that. It shouldn't be like that. But that's what these young folks are dealing with. And that's the bigger question.
I appreciated that, especially for a brown girl, to not be perfect. I think a lot of times, especially in young adult literature, there's this need to make sure we write them in a way that is redeeming and is making sure people know that our kids are good too, and you were like, no, she did it. She did, epic, tragic mistake, choice, decision. And so to let her be flawed, I thought was a powerful choice. And I'm curious about you being a Black woman writing this story that has some pain and has this Black girl who's going through so much. You spoke about needing the other chapters to kind of to have a break from when she's in the system. How did you take care of yourself emotionally? Just especially, I'm thinking of what's been happening in our world as you were writing it. And I don't know that we talk enough about, like, there's the craft of writing, and then there's the craft of taking care of yourself as a writer. I'm curious how you balance those things.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I compartmentalize a lot. I don't know if that's healthy. I don't know if it's healthy. It's like when I'm in it, and then when I'm out, I'm out. And I think about writing. It's not as though I'm like, oh, that would be a good, oh, that's how you fix it. Oh, that's what you do. Oh, that would be an interesting story. Oh, but I compartmentalize. And so but I do think about what I'm doing in the work itself, and especially for younger readers. I think we've all had this conversation of like, what are we bringing that might be introducing something to a younger reader that they have never been exposed to, and how do we also take care of them? And so those are a lot of things, and sometimes that makes me that super vocal person where I'm like, I am sensitive about this. I am sensitive about how we talk about this book. I am sensitive about how we do this. Because I am being sensitive, and it's not to say no one else is, about what I am putting my name on, what I am going to talk to people about. And so that's my biggest thing, is that like continual consciousness of, okay, so this is what the plot requires, but also am I feeding into issues into that book too? Right?
So how did you decide, like, I guess that's part of the question, is knowing that there are so many stereotypes about brown girls, Black and brown girls, knowing that people already think, sometimes the worst of us, and that adults are sometimes not forgiving of young people. To make the choice to make her be so flawed and human, as we all are, maybe there wasn't, but was there a time where you struggled with, well, maybe I shouldn't do that, or maybe this might be too far? Like, how did you balance how far to go and how to restrain yourself as a writer, but then also how to be honest to what the story needed?
Yeah, I think that's when the readers come in, and then the more your community community grows, that helps. Because again, I started this in 2014. That's when I was part of Making Diverse Books. That's when I started my podcast. And so there are a lot of conversations that have happened and my community has brought in a way that made me be like, oh, I'm very privileged, right? And so it's like, yes, I'm a Black woman, and that has its things, but I'm also cisgender. I'm also heterosexual. I'm also able-bodied. I am, at this point in my life, somewhat economically stable, right? I didn't grow up like that at all. I was homeless a little bit as a teenager. So there are things that I recognize, and then in those ways that we connect with each other, you're like looking at them a bit more than you weren't before, and then kind of be like, oh shit, sorry. Like, oh shoot, like, am I doing this? And that's when the community comes in, right? Like where you go to people you trust, where you hire folks to read these things for you, where you're like, I trust you, Renee, I trust you, Brent, I trust you, Erica, I trust you, Benedict, and John, to like read this book. And I will say, like, one of the hardest ones, there was this hump I had. There was like, y'all see the character, character, and then there was this circle of point where Violetta I was just struggling with, and I didn't know how to get her there. And we submitted it to Stacy, my editor, who's amazing, and she was like, like she's kind of, she's giving me really great advice, but she's questioning that, and it was a valid question of like, I don't know how to get her here, and I think that was the issue. Like one of the trials changed dramatically because it was kind of doing something that I thought it was helping, but it actually wasn't. It was actually more successful to revise it in a different way and make it what it is. But those are the things you really need to be checked on. So sometimes it really isn't you checking yourself and being constantly aware. It really is someone like, hey, not working, think about that. And so I value that a lot too. So that's really what helps in a lot of ways.
The notion of community in the book, Vincent is operating out in the community while Violet is in the system, and to try to help folks understand more a little bit about the trials, this notion of having to, so if you commit a crime, and this is mentioned early in the book, if you commit a crime, you could go up to prison in Albany, or or you could be flat out forgiven in the juvenile justice system. And there's a third option, which is this notion of the trials, which is I think one way that made me think about it is, at least as I read it, was a way for both the people involved in the act or the crime or whatever it is, and the community to have to engage with what happened and why did it happen, as opposed to, well, through the court system, it's been deemed that XYZ happened and therefore you're out, like you said before. And so for Violetta, there's this story of her having to come to terms with, how did I act this way? And for Vincent, right? For Vincent, there's some notion of having to witness this as she's communicating this through the trials, and having to deal with the community reaction to her publicly talking about this, right? And so I would love for you to talk a little bit more about Vincent and and sort of like what his role is in the book again, and more about who is he? How does he feel as he's interacting with the community? How does he feel to have a sister who's become this sort of spectacle in the public eye? This is all rich stuff that's in the book, and why it's so great, because there's all these levels, and maybe folks can hear a bit more about Vincent's journey.
Oh yeah. So with Vincent, I don't know about y'all's, right, but sometimes at your worst moments, people just want to make you feel better, and they say the worst thing possible, and you're just like, wow. But it's really to make you, it's like that feeling of like, I just want to make you feel better, or I want to tell you what I think. And you're like, I don't really need that right now. So that's kind of what Vincent's dealing with, right? Is like, he's dealing with the onslaught of awkwardness and pity, and then people having opinions and not really looking at him and what he's dealing with. And so I identify a lot with that, because even most recently, like last summer was a wild one for me. And then folks just said the weirdest things you're like, oh, this is why people hide. This is why people don't make announcements. This is why people don't go public about things, because then you have opinions. Then you know, like, people have opinions. And so I think for him, it was a bit easier to tap into him wanting to not be part of it, but he's forced to be part of it, and he has no support system either, right? So Violetta very literally doesn't have the family, but she has something in detention, and that was important too, not to just be like, this is Oz for kids, you know. I'm like, no, this is like, she has a community there, and they're together, and they look after each other. But then with Vincent, you see, he has a community, but he doesn't know how to actually utilize his community, and sometimes the community just doesn't come off the best way, unintentionally, right? And so those kind of parallel stories, to see that they're actually quite similar.
Very similar.
And they're like, we didn't know what you were going through at all. And I was so in my world. And then he feels the guilt. And then he's watching his parents make these decisions, but it's technically family decisions. And so he's feeling a lot of conflict because his parents are like, give her these trials if you say these will help. And he's like, I don't think they'll help, but I don't really have a voice, I guess. And I guess we're doing this, and I don't feel good about this. And so that was really his journey, because I think by the end of the book, I think Violetta's a bit more concrete in who she is than when she was at the beginning. And I think Vincent's actually the other way around. I think he's a little bit like, I know how to do these things, and then by the end he's been shaken to the point where he's like, I actually don't know if I'm as confident in what I was. So that's kind of like those loops that you're doing.
What's interesting about the two of them is that there's a lot of secrets in this family. There's secrets that are intentionally hidden, like I'm gonna lie to you type of secret, and then the ones that just, I just never shared that, so you don't know that this is what's going on. So there's all these nuances and layers around what we share, what we hide, the facade we put up, and I'm just curious not what you're trying to say, because I know you're not coming to the page like, message, young people, I want you to know, radicalize the babies! I do know that you write with intention. So I'm curious of what you're saying about how, about secrets and sharing, especially in a world that is so open and we post all kind of things. And so like when you think of young people navigating what to share, who to reach out to, how to deal with, maybe I should tell this, and maybe no, this is probably private, just for my family. What are you trying to say there for young people, and what inspired you to put all of that in the story too?
I really wish I could say sometimes that I had a plan.
Yeah.
I did not.
Those are the best moments.
Like sometimes I'm like, well, that seems to work, I guess. So that was interesting. Okay. So yeah, I think it goes back to the power thing, but it was again really crucial for them to both have communities. It was very crucial for them to have love, and if they didn't have love, that was a problem. If they were this isolated, I was like, that's not the story I want to write.
Yeah.
I want Violetta to have her community, and they're all going through what they're going through, and they're supporting one another. And I wanted Vince to have his community, and then through help of getting the parents to that place of showing that the parents are not doing any of this with any ill intention. They are desperate for someone to say, this is how we help your child. Because you did.
Yeah.
And that's what they're literally, right? Like they're coming in, like the Department of Corrections is coming in and saying, well, this happened on your watch. Right? And how do you take that? And how do you try to make things better? And so I think that was my biggest focus, was like that they had communities, and that those communities are one that are flawed, but they do talk to, right? Like eventually they do talk to each other, even if it gets to a really critical point. They do eventually say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm obviously not helping. Like Kiely and Violetta, like just, having, Kiely's like Violetta's super energetic friend, who has a lot of feelings and thoughts, but is also like, I'm your girl, I'll get you, Judy. She would break her out. You know what I mean? She would be like, ride it down, girl, and she's like 15. But like I wanted her to have that, and then have that friend who just understood, so that she had an outsider who knew her before, and then people who knew her during. And then for Vincent, Vincent, you know, he's dealing with the perception, the persona, and then the reality. And so those were things I was very cognizant of, but I don't know that I was like, oh, and this isn't the message I want it to be. I was
Sorry.
Were they like this?
We heard earlier that we were going to get some visitors. I didn't mean to rush.
It's like
Well, I was thinking earlier when you were talking about some of the family secrets and some of the stuff that family's dealing with. In my mind, there is a comp to Everything I Never Told You, because there's this dynamics of family secrets, and there's stuff that if people could just communicate a little bit more, we could solve so much more, which is why community then becomes important, as you were mentioning, for both of the siblings. And I wondered if you would just maybe share a little bit more about the community that Violetta has inside, like Petra and Eve. Because it's really, I found those relationships to be so rich, and maybe not told in some of the stereotypical ways I think that we often see relationships, shown inside. And this felt different to me. So.
Oh, good. It's funny because I feel like that, like with the talking thing, I feel like that's what every Hallmark movie is, right? Where they're just like, I saw him hug her. We're done. And I'm like, just talk to him. He's right there. Why are you running out to the night? Like, girl, what is happening? And then that goes on for 20 minutes and then they get together. And you're like, we just needed to talk. There's just a person he hugged with his mom. So you're just like, this is hilarious. But I am a fan of Hallmark. It's like, so Serena and Eve and Petra are all also in detention with Violetta. And so Eve is the person who Violetta came in at the same time with. So they have their own bond. And Eve, unfortunately, is waiting for a decision. So throughout this book, while like Violetta is like, knows what's happening, Eve is like, I have no idea what's going on. Okay, and so they say that's her own kind of trial, right? It's like, what's going on? And then there's Petra, who's there for 9 months apparently, and she was going through a trial that seems more like torture, quite frankly. And then there's Serena, who came in a little bit after Violetta, and she's also just dealing with her own trial. So Violetta and Serena get assigned trials at the same time. And so they each have different things, which becomes kind of hard. I know I'm like upstage by raccoon.
I love the raccoon. Like now the mind is the book
Someone tied the book to the raccoon. That is free advertising. And so they all are there for their own reasons that they have been found guilty for by the victims. But Violetta's the one whose family is dealing with it. Someone asked me why the family, and I said that's the highest stakes imaginable. That like pulls you in immediately, and that warrants Vince's. And it's not to say that Vince wouldn't warrant it otherwise, but it kind of really warrants his perspective because now you're in it and watching the decision making happen and how that occurs more closely than if it was like some random person and then you're hearing from them. So I wanted it to be very tied closely together.
Yeah, stakes are very high. Can we talk about craft for a little bit? I want to talk to you, writer to writer. So there's a lot of writers here. There's some published, some aspiring. You have such a vast experience in publishing, being an editor, having a podcast that interviews writers and talks to writers, working and being one of the founding members of Unidiverse. I mean, you've done it all.
I didn't found it.
No, in the very early years.
Yes, I was there.
That's what I'm saying. So you know publishing. You know so much of it. I would love to know what it was like to be on this side of it, as far as writing something. Because I know you have adult short stories. That's I think was the first time I heard you read somewhere. Was you were remember reading the short story, and it was amazing. And I was like, what? She writes too? You do all these other things. And I'm so curious of what it felt like to be vulnerable and take a creative risk, a professional risk to say, I'm going to do YA, and I'm going to write this novel and put myself out there. So can you talk a little bit about that decision, and then just what is your writing practice? Like, how did you approach writing this?
Yeah, so I've written the whole time, right? So publishing is a job, because I want to benefit. So it was a job, and it's a job I love and was good at. But writing was always the passion.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I would take paid time off to go to residencies. I would take time off to go to writing conferences. Like I spent thousands and thousands of dollars on the craft to understand the craft. And you still learn the craft, you know? And so that was always the investment alongside building a career. But that doesn't mean it's like weird to be on the other side. It is weird to be on the other side. But also I compartmentalize, right? And so like Jenny who's here, and she's amazing, I love Jenny. So she really liked this, and so we ended up working together. And Jenny is very editorial, which is what I love about her, but also what I hate as a person, because I love the feedback that's helpful to build the craft. And then she was like, we're just gonna submit. And I was like, all right, I can't worry about this. It's a pandemic, whatever. Like the world is ending. Like, you know, but not, right? But it was just like, okay. And then like someone was interested, and I was like, seriously? Like what? Because you just put it away. Yeah, like again, I put it away. I'm like doing so many things. If you saw me earlier, everyone's like, do you need anything? Oh, I got it. Because that's just how I operate. I'm just all over the place and very organized at the same time. It's weird. It's very weird. So I was just like, I can't worry about that right now. And then Stacy was interested, and I was like, get out, no way. And so it's just so funny, because I will say this about Stacy was that, you know, when I would talk to people, I was like, Stacy's great. She was very intense editorial letters. And I was like, okay. And the second person told me the exact same thing. And then the third person was like, I know about Stacy. I heard about her letters. And I was like, okay. I was like, this is my person. She's gonna make me better. And then you get the letter. And you're like, cool.
They weren't lying.
You're like, I'm not hurt at all. I'm gonna take a walk. And then you come back and you're like, okay, everything is valid. Everything that Stacy put in that letter with love and time and attention was valid. And so when you know you're being cared for in that way, you're like, okay, this is the work, you do it. And so I ask a lot of questions. People know this about me. So, I'm curious about a lot of things. But that's how I look at it. Is like, if we're in it together, and we're partnering together, and I'm happy to have that relationship. And I felt like from Jenny to Stacy to all this, it's like, I felt people got it. And when you have someone who gets it and who reacts as strongly as Jenny and Stacy do, then you're like, okay, this is what, I can't control what happens after this. I don't know. But I can't control the fact that this community helped me make this better. And that was my focus. And that's how I got to finish after a while. But my craft is that I write when I write. Which, sorry, Stacey. Instead of meeting deadline, you know, I try to meet deadlines, but it's also like I write when I write, and sometimes I'll do the Pomodoro method, if you know that, right? You write for 45 minutes, you end for 15, you write for 45 minutes, 15. But it really needs to feel like I know where this is going. I can't do the blank page and force myself. I can't do it. Like, it doesn't work for me. But I come to the page ready to edit or to do something, or when I'm free, raccoons, whatever. That might give you the idea to be able to fix some plot holes. So that's kind of where I come from. I wish I had something like wake up at 6:30. No. I did not wake up at 6:30. Mm-hmm. So I want people to feel good about the fact that sometimes you just can't produce. That is real, and it happens to everybody, and just honor that. But you know, bills gotta be paid, you want that check, I get it. But that's also why I can't rely on writing as my sole career. Because with this, you know, I have a eating habit, so. I was like, I'm not feeling it today. Well, Jenny, bills gotta get paid.
Your characters feel so fully realized to me, as if they're people you know. And I think there's always an inclination like, oh, it's a novel, but it must be your story, or some nonsense like that, which is not the case so often. But I'm curious about it then, with regards to craft. You know, I'm just kind of curious myself thinking about this, but like when you're especially because you have such a large cast of characters in this book, which is so awesome. And I'm envious. Like I think it's easier for a writer to say, well, I can just do like first person, like just me, you know, whatever. Whereas, yeah, and you've created this cast. I'm just curious, like, so in the process of writing, like how do you know when a character is going to become a bit richer and fuller and more of a character in the story, or do you have that mapped out ahead of time and then chisel that character out of the stone, so to speak, or do they emerge organically? I'm just I don't even know. I hadn't planned that question. I'm thoughtful about it because I'm thinking about how you have created characters who we want to root for, but who have, you know, caused great harm. Right. You have characters who want to forgive, but are in such pain that forgiveness can't come quickly. Right. And that all feels so natural to me. And so I'm just curious if it just emerges, or
did it come through revisions?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I also want to check. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, so Vincent Violetta came, I think, very clearly to me, and that's just how I know a character sticks. I will say there were even more people in earlier versions. And so Petra got merged into one person, and then Serena was like a group of efforts. So Vince had way more friends. And then after a while, you know, you get valid commentary, which is like, what are they like, and what do you look like? And I'm like, I don't know. There's 85 people in this book. I can't track everybody. And they're like, well, maybe you don't need it. And so that's part of where it was. It's just like there were certain people who were always very distinct. And then there are other people who were in the background and weren't serving as much of a purpose. But then like Byron is one of Vincent's characters, and then he can do something. And then I got feedback that like they wanted more of Ross, who's a kind of foil, you know. And then, but essentially it's the family and those core networks. But I had like a lot more young women in detention, and then it was just like, well, maybe Violetta just needs a core group rather than to be in a group, like a therapy group that promotes who leads too many people for the sake of narrative. But in a movie might be better, right? And so there are those choices you have to make after a while of like, can you describe 25 people? It's like, maybe. You can do some George R.R. Martin type stuff. But maybe you're like, I don't have it in me, and they don't serve that purpose. And sometimes other people need to tell you, they don't serve that purpose. And so that's really what happened, is that I just honed in more on the most key characters. And some aren't there for like Janice, right? Like some people in Vincent's life are not there throughout the book. And even Kiely, she comes up, but when she comes up, she's important. She's crucial. Yeah. So that's how I looked at it. It's like your community, like how do they come up in real ways? So that's
I appreciate you saying, you know, that it's been a minute. You've been at this. You were taking classes. You're not some like overnight success. You know, you've been working at this, and I have witnessed your hard work. I am so proud of you. I like to give people their flowers while they are living and when nothing sad is going on. And so it's so nice to celebrate you tonight, Jen. You have been so authentic and so real, and you show up. How you showed up for your characters and your readers in this really thoughtful way. Like, I'm gonna make sure I put something out into the world that's going to nurture our young people and make them talk and have conversations and make adults think about how we're treating our young people, is exactly who you are in real life. And some people write the books, but they're not living what they write. This one right here, she's a real one. Thanks for letting me celebrate with you tonight.
Thank you all. I do have like a request, but you don't have to do it, especially if you're like, okay, no, which are downstairs again, along with books. Is that I have postcards and pens and stamps on either side of this room, and so letters are very, very pertinent, as I mentioned in this book, and I think they really helped to make it come together when I was very stuck. And so I invite you to write to yourself or to somebody and mail that, or you can give it to me and I'll mail it, because I'm gonna pass by a few mailboxes. It's gonna happen. To someone, you know, just where you're at, how you're feeling. Maybe it's a message to yourself of just like, this is where I'm at today, this is where I'll be tomorrow. And maybe that's something you need to see. And that's a little surprise for yourself. Or maybe it's to someone else that you want to mail that to. So I invite you to do that on either side. Their pens, their stamps, their postcards, all that good stuff. And I thank you all for being here. I thank you, Brandon and Renee. But also request from your library if you can't buy them. We'd love that.